Possession is something that is throughout all of Five Nights at Freddy's, but is very rarely elaborated on. We don't really know how it works or why it happens. We just know that it does. That's not necessarily a negative to the series. Plenty of fantasy series I adore deeply don't truly explain the inner workings of their magic. And that's fine. I mean, if I asked you, can you explain to me exactly how Bluetooth functions? I don't know, you probably don't know, but you know how to use Bluetooth. And in those magic systems, it's kind of the same way. So for Five Nights at Freddy's, we don't need to know how possession works. But if we did, we could better understand not only the franchise itself, but every possessed character inside of it. And considering everything we've seen throughout this series, especially some of the more recent entries, I think I've cracked it. I think we can make a specific formula on exactly how possession works in Five Nights at Freddy's. And I'm so confident in this formula, I don't even want to call it a theory. So Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a fact. Now, a great question to get out of the way immediately is, why does any of this matter? Like, understandably, it's fun to just play in the space because we can, and do these theories because we can, but if you're not interested in the aspects of how the universe functions in Five Nights at Freddy's, and you only want to know the lore, it's reasonable to ask why you would want a formula to prove how possession works. But I would argue that knowing that kind of a formula would help you better understand the lore in general. Think about it. If you can know exactly how things are possessed and what's needed to possess them in a franchise, then when you're going throughout the lore and trying to figure out which characters are possessed, you can refer back to this formula and make better informed assumptions about these characters. After all, when we're trying to figure out which animatronics are possessed, which ones aren't, which spirits are still around, it would be incredibly helpful if we could definitively nail down what was possession in the first place. Doing so would actually be pretty simple. Does this character act weird? Yes. Do they have the required steps for possession as per our formula? Yes. Then they're probably possessed. Not only that, I genuinely think this formula taken to its logical conclusion could better inform us about aspects of the robots themselves beyond possession, like if they're using a mimic AI or not. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, there is another question I have to address. I hear you. Don't we already know how possession works? It's Remnant. We've been knowing this since the novels, it's just Remnant. Remnant does seem to definitively be a part of possession, but not the entire story. Remnant itself doesn't actually seem possessed. Think about stories like To Be Beautiful and Frailty. Inside of it, there's a heart locket made out of Remnant, and characters use that locket to appear differently, heal people who are dying. Clearly, this is a supernaturally charged pendant, and it is made of Remnant, but it's not possessed. Like, there's not a specific person inside of this locket telling people to do stuff. As important as Remnant is, it's not the only reason things get possessed in Five Nights at Freddy's. After all, there are things that are possessed before Remnant ever enters the picture. Think about the FNAF 1 crew. Children were killed and put inside of these animatronic suits, and they became possessed. Not because the animatronic suits were injected by Remnant. Now, when those suits are melted down, it creates Remnant. That possession creates Remnant, and Remnant can create further possessions. But for Remnant to happen at all, possession needs to occur first. So, if it's not just Remnant, how can we possibly figure out a formula to possession in Five Nights at Freddy's? Well, with repeated examples of it, and one statement. The first step in understanding how something works is identifying the examples that already exist, ones that you can prove are real. In other words, to figure out how possession works, we need to go over every definitively proven possessed character in the series. We want as little wiggle room in our variables as possible. So to go over those, we have the FNAF 1 crew, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, and Golden Freddy. All 5 of them act in ways that cannot be explained outside of possession, frankly, and the whole series started with the premise of possessed animatronics. Moving on to FNAF 2, the answer is more vague. Many people make the argument that the toys just act that way due to faulty programming. I think it's pretty clear they're possessed, but in the interest of being as clean about this formula as possible, we won't even use the FNAF 2 animatronics, just because there's an argument to make that they're not possessed. except for the marionette. That's gotta be possessed. That's on the list. Springtrap is obviously possessed. There's a dead guy inside of it, and it doesn't move until after the dead guy goes inside of it. The Funtime animatronics from Sister Location are also pretty definitely possessed. Not only do they act in a strange way that would explain it like that, but the entire point of Sister Location was to inject them with Remnant, which would make them be possessed. Not to mention the whole situation with forming into Ennard and then Molten Freddy. Speaking of, pretty much every main animatronic in FNAF 6 is possessed. But to be fair, they're animatronics we've already talked about. Springtrap, who's now Scraptrap, the Marionette, who's now inside of Lefty, the Funtimes, who are now Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy, and the original FNAF animatronics, which I believe in Molten MCI, so Molten Freddy. Now, stop what you're doing and drink bleach. And by that I mean drink GamerSupps X Bleach 1000 Year Blood War collab. It launches at 3 p.m. today. That's in like an hour if you're watching this as the video goes live. You can learn more about it with the link in the card, drinkbleach.com, but don't forget, if you're ordering GamerSupps, to use code RYTOAST for 10% off your entire order, and it does support the channel when you do so. Steel Wool era does get a lot harder to prove on which animatronics are and are not possessed. After all, there's just advanced AI in half of them. Like, I don't think any of the Glamrocks are possessed. And even if you think they are, there's a good argument to make that they're not. So, in the order of being clean, I just kind of want to leave out most of them. But I do feel fairly confident that there's no good argument that the Blob and Burn Trap aren't in some way possessed by something. So, when trying to figure out how possession works, I believe that these are all of our very definitively possessed animatronics. Like, all of them, there's really no other explanation besides there's some kind of ghost in there. So, to figure out what's necessary for possession, all we really need to find out is what all of these disparate characters have in common. But it's not as obvious as you might think. Because at first, many people would obviously say, well, they're all robots. And looking at this, those are all robots. But that's because I lied to you. In fact, I lied to you for dramatic effect, and I will do it again. Because I left one crucial character out of this equation of all of these possessed characters. Some of you might have already spotted him. Hey, where's Michael Afton? This dude gets his body filled with an animatronic mess of parts, and then his corpse is left on the street, and then he possesses himself to stand back up again. Now you could argue it's because there was Remnant injected inside of him when the scooper attacked him. You could argue it's his spirit itself. Whatever you want to argue, he's not a robot. So it can't be that it has to be a robot. So what do they all share in common? Well, firstly, there is some sort of spiritual weirdness about them. Either somebody died inside them or very close to them, or Remnant was injected into them. In some way, spiritual energy was added to this creature. But we know it can't just be that, because of the aforementioned pendant made out of Remnant. If an object like that can exist and not be possessed, then it can't just be that adding spiritual energy makes something possessed. There's something else that needs to happen. And frankly, that is where I was kind of stumped, until Momo submitted a theory about the timeline to my podcast. Look, I say it a bunch, you guys inspire me, what can I say? I have a weekly podcast on this channel called Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where I take questions and theories from you guys via email and Patreon submission. And recently, Momo submitted, frankly, a very interesting theory on how Fiona might be trying to replace David by combining a child's soul with the Mimic AI. It's a great read, and I'll put it in the description or comments or somewhere for you to read it. But when talking about it on the podcast, the rabbit hole that I went down led me to realize something. That's the missing link. Not necessarily the Mimic AI, intelligence, any form of intelligence. And that revelation came from a place of recognition, because I didn't come up with that idea. Dr. Phineas Taggart did. The Fazbear Fright epilogues are our main source of information on Remnant and Agony in general, with a different scientist studying each one. Of note for today's theory is Phineas Taggart, whose main scientific goal is to understand agony, the energy of the most negative human emotion. He believed that that energy would linger on objects near tragedies, and that energy could be collected and manipulated. And he had a hypothesis about agony that would explain what we think haunted objects are. I'm gonna read it out loud. Tell me if it sounds familiar. My work is focused on my hypothesis that you can take a saturation of agony, add any kind of intelligence, even an artificial one, and they will combine together to transmute the energy of emotion into the energy of physical action. This, I believe, is what explains what people call haunted objects. The combination of agony and intelligence, a hypothesis that he proves in the same epilogue when he fills an endoskeleton with the agony of several objects and then inputs in artificial intelligence. What springs to life is the Stitch Wraith, the anti-hero of the rest of the epilogues. Now, we've been talking about possession, not agony, this whole time. But in this book, agony is described as just the energy of the worst human emotion. But Phineas himself says that all human emotions have energy linked to them. It's my long-standing belief that while Remnant is spiritual energy melded with metal, whatever that spiritual energy is just another form of agony, but of a different emotion. I think it's likely joy or bliss, possibly love, in some way the strongest positive human emotion, especially with how we see Remnant interact with agony in the books. Not only does Remnant and agony sort of neutralize each other, but when approaching a human's memories, Remnant is able to amplify their best and most positive memories. Meanwhile, agony is able to trap them in their most negative memories. They affect humans in similar but opposite ways, almost like spiritual energy and agony are two sides of a similar coin. It's probably why in FNAF AR, we collect Remnant while avoiding agony. The terminology in FNAF AR was always weird because this isn't Remnant, it's not in metal, but this spiritual energy still can exist separate from agony and separate from metal. So if spirits in this universe are just the emotional energies of the deceased, then I think we have our formula. And funnily enough, it's one that gives Scott a get-out-of-jail-free card in a way. I don't mean to read into an author too much, but I know Scott Cawthon is a very religious man, and the supernatural doesn't jive super well with a lot of different religions. Granted, this is a fictional story, so that's already one thing, but if in this world, possession is the emotional energy that somebody had left behind, combined with an intelligence, even an artificial one, then it's not like there's actually ghosts per se, but the emotions of people who have died remaining and manipulating an intelligence that's still there. Our formula to possession is the spirit of someone who's died combined with any form of intelligence, even artificial. All these robots have some form of programming inside of them. And Michael Afton had only recently fully died. Many studies show that the brain lingers on long past the body gives up. It's entirely possible that when his spirit reattached to his body from the remnant lingering inside of it, it just possessed his own brain, essentially continuing to live. Now that's the formula, but I mentioned earlier that if taken to its logical extreme, we could learn more about individual characters using that formula. Now what do I mean by that? Think about the different behaviors of characters we witness in the franchise. We have characters like Scraptrap, who seem not only fully articulate but planned. It's basically just William Afton, the game even credits him so. Compare that to a character like Bonnie from FNAF 1. It wanders around the pizzeria, it tries to get into an office to kill the security guard, but the whole time it's just moaning and breathing weird, screaming and seizing when it finally gets to the security guard. Bonnie acts animalistic. The marionette even confirms differences like this in Ultimate Custom Night.
The others are like animals, but I am very aware.
So why is it that some possessed animatronics seem fully intelligent, while others seem less so? If our combination is spiritual energy plus an intelligence, and all of them have a similar spiritual energy, at least we have to assume so, then the variable here must be intelligence. And looking at our characters, I think that makes perfect sense. The more complex the intelligence of a possessed being is, the more articulate the possession itself becomes. Here's a perfect example. Think about FNAF 1 versus Sister Location. As mentioned, the FNAF 1 animatronics are fairly animalistic. They wander with seemingly no purpose, their movements are jerky, their attacks are erratic, and they never once form together to try to, as a team, take on the Night Guard. They don't even seem to purposely take on the Night Guard. They wander around, and if they see him, they want to kill him. Compare that with Sister Locations, animatronics that are not only fully able to talk to you, but are capable of carrying out complex plans. They work together to form into Ennard to trick Michael Afton into the scooping room to hollow out his body and wear it to leave the sister location bunker. That is a very detailed plan specifically made to outsmart the security system of the place they're being held captive in. Just a month or so ago, I made a full theory on how the sister location animatronics may have been William's best attempt to replicate the Mimic, which would mean the intelligence inside the sister location animatronics far surpasses anything else William had built up to that point, especially the intelligence inside of the FNAF 1 animatronics, who just do a dance like this and then recite a pre-programmed song. The intelligence of the animatronic is of higher quality, and thus its possession is more articulated. And then we have characters like Springtrap and Michael Afton who have human brains inside of them, the most complex intelligence could ever be, which is why William Afton as Springtrap and Michael Afton as himself are basically themselves again. So I hear you, what then of the marionette? Funnily enough, this is more aligned with what Momo's initial theory was about. In it, she suggested the possibility that the puppet had some sort of mimic AI inside of it. After all, Fiona was a puppeteer, and there's clear connections between MCM and the puppet. And in this logic, that lines up perfectly. The marionette is one of the most intelligent possessions in the entire series, to the point where Ralph the phone guy literally says, "I don't like the puppet, it feels like it's always thinking." And he doesn't even know about ghosts, but even he can tell. This formula works again and again and again, and it's based off of something stated in the books and proved by the examples that we see in the franchise. And if this is true, which at this point I feel like it has to be, we can take this idea and look into other possibly possessed characters throughout the franchise and better understand if they are or not in fact possessed. If they have the materials and they act strange, we can call it possessed with more confidence now. This formula might crack open a whole new can of worms, and I can't wait to start using it. So, what do you think? I really, truly believe in this formula, and I think it might finally explain how possession works at all. But I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments. Does this add up? And maybe try using this formula on other possessed characters in the franchise and see if it keeps working. Formulas like this only stand the test of time if they're tried over and over again. That's the scientific process in general. Hey, perfect timing. Why don't you use that formula on the character in this video? Are they possessed? Do they have the qualifications? Figure it out. For your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with #ToastArt. And a big thank you to our generous patrons who help me keep doing this channel in spite of the fluctuating ad rates of YouTube. With a special thank you to our breadwinners this week, Anomaly, Madison Esmond, The Mana Tree, Marks, Sam Pinnell, and Westward Meadowlark. And until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.